Mrs. Maaargh, otherwise known as Creature Teacher, is probably one of the most popular Goosebumps monsters in Series 2000. And this is mainly due to her appearing and being a major character in the video game Goosebumps Horror Town. And also, she even received a sequel in the Most Wanted series entitled Creature Teacher, The Final Exam. And so, since most Goosebumps monsters in Series 2000, I think all but one actually of the monsters in Series 2000 actually received a sequel. And so it just shows how popular Mrs. Maaargh is, because she is one of the only Series 2000 monsters to actually have a sequel. And so, despite Mrs. Maaargh being so popular though, they have never delved into her origin story. But her origin story, kind of seems obvious. She's a monster, she was born a monster, and she eats humans. That's her origin story. It seems like. But I've done a bit of research, and I think I've come up with a conclusion completely different. But before I go on about that conclusion, spoiler warning for the third Goosebumps book in Series 2000, and that is Creature Teacher. Also, we're going to be having some spoilers for the Streets of Panic Park, mainly its main antagonist. And also, we are going to be having some minor spoilers for Creature Teacher, The Final Exam. But I should not worry you too much about that one, since, I'm mainly going to be talking about her weakness, no plot points or anything like that. Just, this is her weakness in the story, and that's it. It's nothing big at all. And so, anyway, guys, let's get started with the video. So, Creature Teacher, otherwise known as Mrs. Maaargh, or however you pronounce her name, first appeared in Creature Teacher from Series 2000, as I think I've said before. But anyway, in the story, the main protagonist, whose name I think is Paul, goes to this new boarding school called the Caring Academy. And he goes there and he meets some of the other students, and who all keep claiming that their teacher is a monster. And he, of course, doesn't believe them until he sees his teacher, Mrs. Maaargh, or however you pronounce her name. I can never really figure out how to pronounce her name. But anyway, so he sees this new teacher, and then we're introduced to basically this list and of all the students. And so pretty much she keeps a record of all the students and how well they do. If you do really well in the school, she'll put that student close to the top of the list. But if you do very bad, she puts you at the bottom. And who's ever at the bottom at the end of the year, she eats. And so that's sort of the plot of the book. And basically the main protagonist is trying to avoid being on the list, but he constantly fails at all of his attempts to not be at the bottom of the list. And at the end of the year, his main goal is failed. And so, before I get into the ending of the story, though, just one thing to keep in mind. Earlier in the story, the main protagonist made friends with this other kid. I cannot remember his name. But basically, he is Mrs. Maaargh's son. All the other students obviously do not like him due to him being the son of Mrs. Maaargh, but the main protagonist is actually the only one who's nice to him. Until he figures out that it's Mrs. Maaargh's son. But anyway, so back to where I was at. Creature Teacher is about to kill the main protagonist and eat him and everything. But then Mrs. Maaargh's son comes in, and he tells the main protagonist Mrs. Maaargh's weakness. So basically, if you make Creature Teacher laugh, then she'll go into hibernation for a year. And so the main protagonist succeeds in doing this, and then an epic twist ending is revealed that Mrs. Maaargh's son is also a monster, and he is thinking about eating the main protagonist. And that's sort of how the story ends. I do not buy that whole monster aspect with Mrs. Maaargh's son, for obvious reasons. I honestly think that is a prank, because just think about it. Throughout the story, the Mrs. Maaargh's son has kept a human form. No matter what, he's kept a human form all throughout the story. And so much so, in fact, that he's a human, that the main protagonist does not even think he's a monster, and doesn't even know that it's Mrs. Maaargh's son. And so, just judging from that, you think that this is obviously a human child, because Mrs. Maaargh is a monster at all times. I mean, take a look at Creature Teacher, the entire story. Mrs. Maaargh is a monster. Take a look at Creature Teacher, the final exam. Throughout the whole story, she is a monster. And at no time in any of the books is she something like Mr. Mortman, who can transform from a human to a monster. Which, if he is a monster, is what Mrs. Maaargh's son would do. And so you could argue about Goosebumps Horror Town. But here's the thing about Mrs. Maaargh in Goosebumps Horror Town. I think she's completely different than the one you see in Creature Teacher, for obvious reasons. First off, wouldn't it be a whole lot easier for Mrs. Maaargh to stay human if she did have the powers that Mrs. Maaargh had in Goosebumps Horror Town, where she can transform from human to monster and all that stuff? Then why wouldn't she do that? I mean, just think about it. If she could turn into a nice old human, and she just kept track of the students' grades secretly and all that stuff, and then, mysteriously a student disappears, then she wouldn't obviously be the one to blame. Students wouldn't be scared of her all the time, and no one would blame her when a student becomes missing, because just think about it. Every single year, a student goes missing. And then, Creature Teacher looks like a monster. She eats rats a lot. And, while maybe the cops or something like that will not see her eat rats a lot, but they would notice a diminishing supply of rats and how the school constantly orders rats for people. Plus, all of the students that Mrs. Maaargh had, made them study would attest to the fact that she caused a student to disappear. But if she was a human and she kept it all secret, she would pass all of that. No one would suspect her of doing anything. And so the fact that she's a monster during this whole story kind of means that, of course, she cannot turn to a human, because she would be a whole lot less suspicious if she wasn't. And also, how did she get hired on the school unless she maybe previously was a human? More on that later. That's going to be used later on in the video. I'm so sorry I brought that up right now. But anyway, so she obviously, just judging from that, cannot be the Mrs. Maaargh from Horror Town. But there's more evidence than just that. In Horror Town, all Mrs. Maaargh eats, I believe, are bugs and like bug sandwiches and all that stuff. And Mrs. Maaargh constantly eats living rats. And it seems like she likes living food a whole lot more than dead food or bugs or anything like that. And if bugs is what satisfied her to not eat students, then why is she constantly complaining in the book Creature Teacher that she's hungry? Throughout the story, even after she eats rats all the time, she constantly wants to eat. The main protagonist keeps talking about how hungry she is. But if she's the one in Goosebumps Horror Town, she should have the same sort of attitude. But instead, the one in Goosebumps Horror Town constantly eats bugs, does not eat any of the students, keeps a human form, actually enjoys teaching, and she doesn't eat the kids. Just adding all of that together, you can see that those are completely different Mrs. Maaarghs. And so if they are completely different Mrs. Maaarghs, then that means that the whole Mr. Mortman thing with Creature Teacher is completely disproven, and all the more fact that Creature Teacher's son is human. And there's a whole lot more evidence than just that as well, I believe. And so, added evidence to prove that Mrs. Maaargh's son is human is the fact that he wants to eat the main protagonist. Just think about it. The main protagonist is the only one who is ever nice to Mrs. Maaargh's son. So wouldn't he attack someone else who was mean to him, which is anyone else in the school but him. Why does he want to eat the main protagonist when he could eat anyone else? Maybe even his roommate. I think they have roommates in the dorm, in the boarding school, so it'd be incredibly easy for him to do that. And I don't see why he doesn't do that before. Also, if he's getting constantly picked on all the time because he's Mrs. Maaargh's son and all that, then why wouldn't he seek vengeance or something like that? After all, he's a monster, and Mrs. Maaargh seems to have a very bad temper when something doesn't go her way or something like that. So, shouldn't that be the same case for Mrs. Maaargh's son? So, if he is a monster, how come he doesn't attack any of the students or anything like that? And so, just judging from those two pieces of evidence, first thing is the fact that Mrs. Maaargh's son is always a human, which is kind of odd, considering that Mrs. Maaargh is always a monster. And also, there's the fact that, he doesn't eat rats. We actually saw him in the lunch scene. He didn't eat rats. And also, the thing I said before, the fact that, he doesn't... I'm so sorry, guys. Kind of getting off track. But anyway, also the fact that he doesn't attack any of the other students for vengeance or anything along those lines. And so, you might think, though, what point do I have in this statement? How does this, delve into the origins of the creature teacher? But here's the thing. If that human child is Mrs. Maaargh's son, then that means that Mrs. Maaargh most likely used to be a human. And so, that is a huge piece of evidence to prove that Mrs. Maaargh is human, but also if you take a look at one of the things that she has in Creature Teacher, the final exam, and that is her weakness, which is hot sauce. What she says in the story is that, she doesn't like hot sauce. That's it. She doesn't like spicy food. And that's all she says. And so that may, it's not a huge piece of evidence, since, she can just pick up a bunch of hot sauce whenever she wants. Honestly, since she's, is still accepted in society, even though she's a monster. But anyway, so she said that she's had hot sauce. But it's kind of weird because she only really likes to eat living food, it seems like. I don't see how she would ever eat hot sauce, and just judging from her diet, all she has eaten are living rats and humans. Meaning that, most likely, judging from all of this, she could be a human. That could lead to her possibly being a human. Then there's her son who's a human, so if her son's a human, then she must be a human. There's all of that. And so I think that automatically proves that maybe she is a human. Also, there's the fact that she gives the kids a chance. If she was a monster who really didn't care about the lives of any of the other students, then why didn't she just automatically eat one of the children outright? Why does she have to wait a whole year? After all, throughout the book, Creature Teacher, she's constantly complaining about how hungry she is. Why doesn't she just attack a student? There's nothing keeping her from attacking a student, unless she maybe was a human, and so she feels sorry for them. This is getting a little crazy, but you get what I mean. There's a bunch of just little things throughout the stories that could tie her to, in the past, being a human. But even if she is a human, you might think, how did she become a monster? And so, first you think maybe the haunted mask. After all, when you put on the haunted mask, you turn into a monster. But I highly doubt so, since she does seem to retain intelligence throughout the stories, and the haunted mask kind of turns into a mindless monster, which Mrs. Maaargh is not. While she is a monster, does have some intelligence, and the haunted mask doesn't really give you any intelligence, really. It just makes you want to get angry and wreck stuff and everything. So it is a possibility that it is the haunted mask that, created her and all that stuff. But it doesn't explain, her weakness, why when she laughs, she hibernates for a year and all that stuff. And all of that. So I highly doubt that. I'm saying all of that a lot, aren't I? Anyway, so there is that. But also, I have another theory, and that involves a Goosebumps villain called the Menace. And so, the Menace basically is the person who runs this park called Panic Park. Back in the normal dimension, a long time ago, the Menace run this park called Panic Park. And so, this park was so scary that they had to take it to another dimension. And basically now, the only way to get to Panic Park is if you're in Horrorland with a mirror. If you have a mirror, you can transport yourself to Panic Park. And so pretty much the Menace's main goal, if you are in Panic Park, is to terrify you, to terrify you to death. I'm so sorry, guys. And so that's his main goal, to terrify people to death. And I think in past events, he has succeeded in doing so. And that's all he wants throughout the story, is scaring people half to death. And I think this could be the case with Mrs. Maaargh. That's how she became a monster. It's because of the Menace. First off, his goal is to terrify you to death. This is kind of a stretch. It's going to get more realistic later on. I go into this thing about the Menace. But the first thing is it explains Mrs. Maaargh's weakness. Because when you're scared a lot, your heart rate goes up. And so, again, this is a very huge stretch. But maybe, since he's terrifying her to death, if she was there in Panic Park, and so after she got out, maybe if she laughs, which also causes your heart rate to go up, she laughs really hard, then she'll hibernate for a year in order to get her heart rate back to normal. Due to, on multiple occasions, I think, the Menace scares people to death. And so maybe it scared her so bad that if her heart rate goes up too much in a certain area, then she will hibernate for a year. That is a huge stretch, but it is a possibility. Also, to explain how she becomes a monster, after all, throughout in the book Streets of Panic Park, I think he made children invisible, turned one into a half-human, half-monster beast. He's also able to come in contact with villains like Slappy, people outside of Horrorland. People in Horrorland do have masks that turn you into monsters. And so there is a bunch of things like that that can prove that this can be Mrs. Maaargh. After all, the heart rate thing I was talking about, also, it's incredibly likely for him to be able to turn Mrs. Maaargh into a monster due to him turning multiple people throughout the story of the Streets of Panic Park into other things, like I said, half-human, half-monster beast. I think a ventriloquist dummy he turned someone else into. Also, he turned someone else invisible. So he's done a lot of things that can show that he can turn other people into other beings. And I think this could be the case with Mrs. Maaargh. And this explains why she has still her same intelligence, the whole heart rate thing, and everything like that. Also, if you take a look at another Goosebumps book, Slappy's Revenge, Slappy, sort of references to Goosebumps monsters that were not in Goosebumps the film. That is Mrs. Maaargh and the Horrorland Horrors, I believe. Mrs. Maaargh and the Horrorland Horrors. I'm so sorry repeating myself for some weird reason. But anyway, you can just tell from that. Because, keep in mind, Slappy has not read any of the Goosebumps books, it seems like. Due to in Goosebumps Night of Scares, Slappy never read the Goosebumps book, The Cuckoo Clock of Doom. And so, if he hasn't read The Cuckoo Clock of Doom, then he most likely hasn't read Creature Teacher and One Day at Horrorland. And he obviously never came in contact with them in Goosebumps the movie, which is, during the time that Slappy's Revenge is set in. So how does he know that Mrs. Maaargh and the Horrorland Horrors exist unless he saw them in Horrorland? Because Slappy is in Horrorland during the events of Goosebumps Horrorland. This will explain how he, references a Horrorland Horror, but also Mrs. Maaargh. Because in order to get to Panic Park, Mrs. Maaargh would have to be in Horrorland, transported from a mirror into that area. And so I think that is a huge piece of evidence to prove it. Also, again, that. And I think, just judging from all those statements and stuff like that, I think the origin story to Mrs. Maaargh is that she went to Panic Park, along with her son, maybe. They got sucked into there, and Mrs. Maaargh was terrified almost half to death, and made her heart rate go up really fast, but she escaped, but the menace turned her into a monster. And now she has to eat a child every year, and, that's sort of how her origin story may go. Again, that's a little bit of a stretch, but I think there's a lot of evidence to prove it. But anyway, guys, comment down below what you think. I'm so sorry about how long this video is. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, comment down below about what you think Mrs. Maaargh's origin story is. Do you think it's, the simple yet realistic one of Mrs. Maaargh being a monster, born a monster, or always been a monster? Or do you think she could possibly be, in her past, a human, but was turned into a monster? And how do you think she was turned into a monster if you do think she's human? Do you think it had something to do with the menace, the haunted mask? Tell me what you guys think. Anyway, guys, that's the end of my video. I apologize again for how long this video is. But anyway, guys, that's the end of my video.